Episode 3 of BS with Bob Schmidt. I'm Bob, and my guest this time around, somebody that I used to intern for, and he's one of the guys that I was jealous of back when I was first starting off in the radio business, staff meteorologist Charlie Hackett. Charlie Wilde, how's it going? Bobby Wilde. I know you have many different names, my friend.
Yeah. It was a pretty heady time back then. I was young and dumb and, coming up in the world, and now corporate radio.
Looking back at the radio business, I started in 87, I started going to Brown Institute. 88, I got my first full-time job, and then I worked it until 2018. What's kind of your career in radio?
My arc? Well, I started in 1977.
Oh, wow.
Yep, I was 12 years old, and I got my third class radio license because back then you had to have a third class, and it all happened because in 6th grade, I was interviewed as a Boy Scout on the local little Colorado station, a 1,000-watt AM that I grew up listening to. And I got to go into the radio station as a scout, and I just thought it was amazing. And I was captivated from that time. So the next year, I was collecting money for the Jerry Lewis Telethon, the Muscular Dystrophy Association. And I took my Tootsie Roll bank full of coins that I had collected through the neighborhood down to the local radio station that had a fishbowl. And so while I was there, I asked for a job. And that's how it started.
And they hired you?
And they hired me. But it was an automated radio station. It was reel-to-reel tapes. The commercials ran on carts in a carousel. I don't know if you remember those kind of things, but
I've worked all of those things.
Yeah. So I basically babysat the radio station. That's how I started. I didn't jump on the air. And when I did get on the air a couple years later, I was nasally. I was going through puberty. My voice was cracking. It was just, if I would have listened to myself back then and probably the people that gave me feedback, I never would have stayed in the business.
The funny thing is that, so I grew up in the Twin Cities. I used to listen to KDWB back when it was a rock station. Then I used to listen to KQ and KDWB, and then they kind of flipped formats, and then KDWB was the rock station. Mm-hmm. And then I started interning at Hot Rock and 104 back in the 6 months that it was a radio station, or it was a year, however long it was. And one of the guys there worked overnights at KDWB AM. And he said,
it wasn't Scott Link, was it?
It was Scott. I don't remember his last name. Scott Dynamite Darren something.
Ah, okay.
I don't remember his last name, but he had frizzy long hair. And he said,
okay,
you should go work at KDWB. So I started working at, being an intern at Hot Rock and 104, then I started working at K63, getting paid, doing the same thing you did, basically babysitting.
Yeah.
But I was going to Brown, and I got to do weathers in the Twin Cities.
Yeah.
While I was 18 years old, and I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And then running into people I went to high school with, and they're like, "You're on the radio, man!" And then I started interning at KDWB when it was downtown for Humble Billy Hayes. And then when you started, they did like a prize a minute or something for 101 minutes or something like that. And I remember just writing down people's names and sending stuff out to people, and it was kind of cool.
Yeah, it was great. And there are so many really cool stories about Twin Cities radio, because that was a very competitive market.
Right.
Back in the day, especially when it came to top 40 radio stations, and the war that we had with WLOL while I was there. My old producer, Scooter, he wanted to talk to me about old radio memories, and we talked about that and the people that we had worked with, and the stuff that we had done, and the things that we put our interns through. Yeah, but it was fun.
I was an intern back when they didn't pay. So interns, after I was done, they got paid. I did not get paid. And I spent a lot of time there, but I learned a lot of stuff, and I got to use the KDWB package when I sent out my tape. My very first radio job, I get used, the KDWB package and all their music and stuff. And I listened to that voice, and I'm like, oh my goodness, how did this guy get a job doing radio?
Yep, that's how I was. Same story. Same story.
So you mentioned that you were a scout. Are you an Eagle Scout?
No, I made life.
Okay, I'm an Eagle Scout.
Well, good for you. I mean, scouting has gotten a bad rap, but I'll tell you, without it, I wouldn't have gone and canoed the Quetico Parks in Canada for a couple weeks. I wouldn't have learned my outdoor survival training, all of that stuff. So,
it's funny. My kids are mad that because I had enlisted my kids in Scouts, and as adults now, they're like, I wish I would have stayed in Scouts, Dad. I'm like, well, you had the opportunity, you decided not to. It's that's on you guys.
Yeah.
Anyway, so who is Charlie Wilde?
Well, so when I got to Minneapolis, I came from Tallahassee, Florida. I was on a little station down there that was a clone of Z100 in New York. We had the same jingle package and everything. And because of that, and I was, I think I was 21 when I went there, and I was only there for a year. But Scott Shannon called me from Z100 in New York because I had sent him a tape, and I'm home one day in Tallahassee, and I pick up the phone and I say hello. He says, "Hey, Charlie, this is Scott Shannon, Z100 New York." I said, "Fuck you," and I hung up the phone. I thought it was one of my friends messing with me.
Right.
But it turned out to be Scott. He called me right back. He said, "Charlie, don't hang up on me again." And I said, "Wait, is this really Scott?" First time I had talked to him. Right. And so I ended up going up there for an interview at Z100. They ended up not hiring me. They ended up hiring Kid Kelly. But Scott talked to the program director, Brian Phillips, in Minneapolis and said, "You got to, listen to this guy." And that's how I ended up getting hired. And subsequently, by the way, Kid Kelly and I remained friends, even though we were going for the same job at the time. But he ended up hiring me at SiriusXM in 2017 to go on the 70s channel. That's where I started there, and then went to the 90s. But yeah, just relationships in radio. It's been amazing. What's
your best relationship that you made in the radio business?
Oh, besides Brooke Shields, no, I'm kidding. I did get to have her on stage and host a thing with her somewhere downtown in a department store, but I only wish that had turned into a relationship. The best relationship is probably a guy that we talked about off the air, Cadillac Jack, or Human Newman, as he became known at SiriusXM, and then Spider Harrison. And I keep in touch with Steve Cochran, who was the morning guy at KDWB, Paul Williams, who was in promotions at KDWB. We remain very good friends, talk all the time. And there's a bunch of people from Minneapolis that I talk to. So best relationship, I don't know if there is one, but I made a lot.
Well, it's good to have all these, it's good to have all these friends and people that, that you end up seeing. What, in the years, are you still doing radio actively?
Not really. I was doing, after I left SiriusXM, which was, for me, a big joke. It was going nowhere. There was no full time. They paid me by shift. I was working 7 days a week, doing 6-hour shows, 7 days a week. No chance for advancement. They just, so I told them, I asked them to fire me a couple times before they eventually did, but it was cool to go down to New York and hang in the lobby and see people like, Gary Oldman walk in the door and the guy from, the dog show in Seinfeld, he came in, Suzanne Summers came in, Ringo Starr. It's just amazing sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
But, sorry, ADD. What was the question?
Are you still doing radio?
So I started doing mornings here on a Boston rock station. It's adult album alternative, AAA, they call it in the biz. And I was there for 2.5 years. But what they wanted was kind of an NPR musicologist sounding person, which is just not in my DNA. It's just it's just not. I'm not very serious. I like to make myself laugh, and that just,
me too.
Do you
laugh at your own jokes?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And I think that over the years, I've learned that laughing at my own jokes translates to other people listening and ratings, and because I think I have a pretty good sense of that. So, right. But it's just radio is just so dead now.
It's so sad because when I got into radio in the late '80s, as I explained earlier, I got into radio to get laid. I mean, that's honestly the reason why I got into radio, so I could have sex. I mean, honestly. Wow. And it didn't really work out. I ended up getting married, and you know how that works out.
You never got laid. I was married too.
There are days that I actually miss it. I miss the instant gratification of somebody saying, "Hey, that was really funny," or "That was, you did you hit that really well," or quick thinking on your feet, or things like that. But there's a lot of things I don't miss, like the zero pay, the working 7 days in a row, 7 days a week for months on end, not getting vacation, having to work holidays, having to work every single weekend. It just ended up being a hassle more so than anything else.
Yeah. Well, it really started going downhill, I think, in the late 80s, maybe early 90s.
When I started.
When big corporations started coming in and were able to gobble up these stations, and they ran them more like businesses. There was a time when radio was an art. It was a real form of entertainment that was respected. There were people that would come into radio studios that were actors, musicians, whatever. They were at the top of the pile, and they knew how powerful radio was. But then radio made itself a jukebox, 12 songs in a row with no talk. It's like, it's like, and then Apple comes along, gives you the iPod, and you don't need anywhere else to get your music. You can just get it right there. So they lost the art form, and they didn't want to pay people who actually could do a show, a real show. Right. So don't get me started on that. We'll be here all day.
Well, I think corporate radio kind of screwed it out of the business anyway, because you drive through a town now, you turn on the radio station, it's storming, and they're talking about sunshine because it's all recorded a day or two earlier from another market. That you don't hear anything of, you don't hear anything local, you don't hear anything live, you don't hear anything about the here and the now that you used to get with live radio.
Yeah, and there was a real art to programming back then, but now it turned into was stations being programmed by bean counters. The program director was more on the side of the sales department than he was on the side of the air staff.
Right.
So cultivating talent, that just became impossible.
So working in large markets, Charlie, you had the opportunity, I'm sure, to interview hundreds of people. Out of the people that you've interviewed or the people that you've met in the radio business, who did you like the least? I know that's the question you probably didn't expect to hear.
Well, one name pops into my head right away. And now, granted, these people come in, they're on the road, they're doing things all the time, going from this station to that station. Could have been a bad day, not saying, because this guy, I don't think he is known as a jerk within the entertainment music industry, but it was LL Cool J.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, he could not have been more dismissive, and just, it was like he didn't want to be here. I actually ended the interview. I said, okay, well, it's obvious you don't want to be talking to me here, so we'll just end it, and good luck. And that was it.
So when you ended it like that, did he give you the attitude after that?
A little bit, but he knew I was serious. I left the studio. I just walked out and went and got a cup of coffee or something like that. Let he and his record person find their own way out, and or my intern maybe did it or something like that. But But yeah, I mean, I've dealt with some really well-known, powerful people that really respected what I did and ended up being fantastic interviewers. They, just to name a couple, Samuel L. Jackson. I wrote this whole script where supposedly I used to have these dream sequences on the air. I was asleep and I was dreaming, and then here he comes as his character from Pulp Fiction. And the premise of the whole thing is that I thought it would be funny to slip Santa some chocolate laxative cookies on his last run around the globe. And Samuel L. Jackson had been hunting for me for an entire year to try to, and then we end it with a whole big gun shooting scene like he and John Travolta in Pulp Fiction going after those kids in that apartment. And then he wakes me up. And he was just so awesome. He did the entire Bible verse, the Ezekiel Bible verse that he did in the movie, to make the bit just fantastic.
Right.
So it was just, it was wonderful. He was great. Will Smith was great. Paul McCartney, who I've got a little poster right back here. So like I said, I could go on for days, but I think the reason that we kind of hooked up was a little story I shared on Facebook, and I don't know if that was on the Prince page or what.
Yeah, I don't know where it was. I just know that I was looking through, and it said Charlie Wilde commented, and it wasn't something that I followed, so I read the story, and I'm like, KDWB used to have those star parties, and I know that you used to host them, and then you mentioned something about running into or meeting Prince, and I'm like, this is pretty cool. Let's talk about that. So tell us about your Prince story. By the way, before you mention, I had a chance to see Prince. I think it was in 1984. It was Christmas Eve, 1984, and he had a matinee show at the St. Paul Civic Center. So it was a 2:00 in the afternoon show. My mom said, "Don't be late for church." I ended up missing church, and my mom was pissed.
Well, it's another kind of church.
I missed church. As a high school student and living at home with mom and dad, you miss church, you're in trouble.
Yeah. Oh man, seeing him back then, that would have been really cool. So he used to party around. There were a couple of clubs downtown Minneapolis, and I can't remember the one that was pretty close to where he eventually opened his own club. Can't remember the name of it, but it was
it First Avenue?
No, it wasn't. I know about First Avenue. That was more of a venue. This was more of a nightclub, and it was multi storied. There were stairs and stuff. That wasn't First Avenue. No. Anyway, so he ended up opening Glam Slam, which was downtown, and I got called to host Ladies' Night there, which I think was on a Tuesday or maybe it was Thursday. But as DJs, we were doing club gigs all the time. That was extra money. It was good publicity, and we enjoyed it. We were young and single and everything else. So when I heard that I was going to be doing Ladies' Night at Glam Slam, I thought, this is really cool. So you go into this club, and because we worked at the radio station, we were all given these VIP passes that get you upstairs to the VIP area. And only select people got up there. So that was really cool. Then I got the gig there hosting, and I thought, this is really awesome. Prince used to come in, he'd come in with his big entourage, and they would go and sit upstairs and kind of overlook the dance floor. I'd never met him or anything. The checks always cleared. It was great. But one year, I did the live broadcast from the State Fair. And as anybody who lives in Minneapolis knows, the State Fair is a pretty big freaking deal. It's just a lot of food, a lot of fun, a lot of weird shaped cheese and butter. And it's a lot of hard work. So I had been doing these live shows there and then leaving from State Fairgrounds, going downtown to host Ladies' Night. So one night, this was right before that, I went up and I saw that Prince was alone, all by himself in his booth up in the VIP area, which was unheard of. So I thought, this is a great time to go and just introduce myself and say thanks. And so I go up there and he's sitting there overlooking the dance floor. I put out my hand. I say, "Hey, Prince, Bobby Wilde from KDWB. I just wanted to say thanks. I'm hosting Ladies' Night and really appreciate the gig." He doesn't take my hand. He gives me the side eye with no expression on his face and just sits there. He says nothing. I thought, well, maybe he didn't hear me. I said, "I'm Bobby from KDWB. I just wanted to say thanks and hi." And he stays sitting there looking at me sideways. So I'm not one to take that, I don't care who from. Right. So I said, whatever. And I just left. I thought, well, my job here is done. I'm going to get the pink slip. So the next week was the State Fair week. I was sitting in the DJ booth and they had a little couch or love seat in there. So between my times on the mic, I would just kind of almost go to sleep. I mean, I was so exhausted. So I'm sitting there on this couch and I feel somebody sit down next to me. I look sideways and I see that it's Prince. And he looks at me and kind of gives me a little smile and a wink. And he said, "Rough night?" And I said, "Yes." And then I turned my head back and went, and closed my eyes. I just...
Because you thought you were sleeping?
Blew him off. So I hear this little chuckle and then he's off. And I thought, okay, well now I'm certainly done. But what happened is that I didn't get a call or a pink slip or anything. I came back in, maybe it was a couple weeks later, week or two anyway. And I'm in the booth doing my thing. And one of his huge bodyguards, who I had gotten to know by sight, comes up and he says, "Charlie, Bobby, the boss wanted you to have this." And he handed me an envelope. And I thought, okay, here's the pink slip. But what it was an invitation to an after hours party at Paisley Park. And I'm going, oh my God, because by this time those are getting pretty famous. And so I thought, wow, that is really cool. I called my girlfriend at the time who was sleeping because it was like 11 o'clock. I think this party started at 1:30 or 2. I said, "Honey, wake up. We're going to Paisley Park tonight. Just got an invite from Prince's bodyguard." She goes, "Oh, that's cool." So we go there and they've got the entire lobby area right outside the kitchen that was more into the studio. They've got it all set up down the hallways lined with food and drinks and anything you could imagine. And there's band gear set up on the floor of that common area. And I thought, oh, cool, somebody's going to play tonight. So after a little while, I see Bobby Z, who was Prince's drummer at the time, and I had known him from being in the radio station. And then I saw somebody else from the band and I go, oh my God, I tell my girlfriend, Prince is going to play. It's not just a band, it's Prince. So there's probably 50 people in Paisley Park at the most. And Prince and his band set up, and they played till 5:30 in the morning. I was standing like 6 feet away from Prince while he's playing his guitar and doing his thing, and it was just amazing. And this was all from blowing him off. It just, and I talked about it on the air, and I got invitations to things that would come up subsequently, other parties and stuff like that. And I thought, wow, this guy must really like me. In fact, I was in Boston. This is after a couple of radio jobs. I'm in Boston in, it was 1999. And I get an envelope at the radio station from Paisley Park. And it said, "You're invited to rave unto the year 2000, Paisley Park, X date." It was in, I don't know, October, November of 99. And I thought, oh my God, that is awesome.
Right.
So I got a pair of tickets. They were actually metallic tickets, hard. I've got them in a safety deposit box. I've got mine. The friend that I took has that one, but went to this show and ended up in the front row for the documentary that they did, Raven to the Year 2000, or the concert film or whatever. And it was just amazing. I hadn't been in town for quite a while, but I still got this. And I certainly didn't keep in touch with Paisley Park or anything, but they somehow found me.
That's pretty badass right there.
Yeah. And it's not like I have ever sat down and talked to Prince. We weren't buddy. We weren't, hanging out on the golf course or on the phone or anything. But he did these kind of things after I blew him off.
Did his death hit you hard?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it was. In fact, my kids and I were in New York City when it happened. And we were on one of those tourist buses, double-decker things, and went by the Apollo Theater. And all kinds of people were outside the Apollo, and they had it all nice in balloons and messages for Prince, and people were just kind of gathered there. And it really, I didn't actually cry, but it really affected me. And I told the kids, this guy has been really nice to me, and I've got to see some really amazing things because of him. Other
Right.
artists that would come into Paisley Park for parties that would, play on stage, Lenny Kravitz, Kenny Loggins, blah, 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 actors, all this stuff. And, it was just, he just kind of gave me really good experiences.
So you mentioned Kenny Loggins' name. I actually met Kenny Loggins at KDWB. We both had the same hairstyle back in the day. Big curly.
Good thing this is only audio, and people can't see both of us. We both have really long hair, by the way.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. Beautiful locks of hair. If people had these back in the day, like phones, how many famous people do you think you've met in the course of your lifetime?
Oh, a bunch. Yeah.
Do you have pictures of everybody?
Pretty much.
Oh, do you?
Pretty much. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite band?
Well, automatically I say Journey is my favorite band. Steve Perry is my favorite rock vocalist. So I make it Journey, but I've got a long story with them and met them actually when I was 20 years old in Denver. Met he and Neil Sean for the first time, and then Neil came back to the Twin Cities with other bands, and he went to Conclave, the big radio conference that they had there.
That's cool. That's a fun place to go to.
I
got pretty drunk at Conclave.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, there's lots of bands, but I'm just I've never been a concert guy since radio because it's not free anymore, and even
No,
in
it
radio,
certainly is not.
even in radio, it's not free. And you don't get the good seats that you used to get.
I went to tons of concerts over the years, and then I got out of radio, and I've been to 3 or 4 concerts since then. I want to see System of a Down. They're playing in Chicago day after my birthday. $400 for shitty seats.
Yeah.
For a concert. I'm like, no, thank you.
Yep. Well, the last time that I paid for a concert ticket, I know exactly, because I had just recently gotten engaged. This was like in 2001 maybe. Paul McCartney came to town, and I've got a picture hanging on my wall back here, but that's another story that I will tell you on another podcast sometime, because Paul McCartney was the nicest big time celebrity I have ever met. He was just amazing. But when he came to Boston, I hadn't seen him in Minneapolis when he played there, the Flowers in the Dirt tour, but he came here to Boston, and I bought tickets for me, my fiance, and her parents, $500 a piece, and I would pay to see him. That's the last concert that I bought tickets for.
You know how I asked you earlier about who the worst interview? I interviewed Bill Cosby the day after they had the information about he was sexually molesting people, and he was doing a concert in La Crosse.
Whoa, good timing.
And I did not ask him about that because it was just hearsay at the time, and he actually did the interview and whatnot. Worst interview ever. He was an arrogant piece of shit. Terrible person. My favorite band is Kiss. I got to interview Paul Stanley. Paul Stanley was the coolest person. It was like you and I talking. It was like we were best buddies.
Yeah.
Like we've been friends forever,
Yeah, Gene Simmons actually came in for Star Party one year, and I was his babysitter because each DJ was assigned to a band or person to take care of them while they're there. And I will never forget Gene Simmons' biggest compliment that I could get at the time was he said, "Nice hair." Gene Simmons said that to me. So there's that. So I could die happy from there. I love Kiss too. I really do.
So I have to ask you, I shave my head.
Yeah.
You shave yours too?
Oh, this is all a choice. Yeah. No, I started balding after I got married, and
me too. Kids is what did it for me.
Yeah, the kids. Yeah,
and they caused this. Well, yeah. Well, that and being 56 years old doesn't help either.
Right.
So the question I usually like to ask people when I wrap up the interview is, how do you want to be known?
Just as a good guy who really loved what he did and was really good at what he did, And I'm talking about my kids, but in radio, I would say the same thing.
Thanks so much for listening to the BS with Bob podcast. Basically, it's just me pulling up the metaphorical bar stool and chatting with everyone from entertainers to educators to business owners to marketing gurus. People who've done cool things, survived weird stuff, and have a good story to tell. Please like, subscribe, and share the podcast.